Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on Elenda the Dusk Rose. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Elenda is a 1/1 vampire with lifelink for 2 generic, 1 white and 1 black. Whenever another creature dies, she gets a +1/+1 counter. This is great in more ways than one. Not only does it make her a huge threat for commander damage, but when she dies you create as many 1/1 white vampires with lifelink as her power. Now this ability used to not work because for a creature to die, it has to enter the graveyard. However, if Elenda is your commander, you may choose to send her to your command zone instead, thus never reaching the graveyard and so not triggering its effect. However, recently, the rules committee decided to change this rule so now commanders with death or exile triggers trigger even if you send them to the command zone. Not that Elenda wasn't viable before this rule change, but now the deck doesn't have to run so many reanimation effects, making the deck so much better since you can use those slots for cards supporting her abilities. The main feel for this deck is an Aristocrat deck where we will be sacrificing creatures for value, especially since those deaths trigger Elenda, which can then sacrifice to get even more sacrifice fodder and triggers. Since Elenda gets a +1/+1 counter whenever any other creature dies, this also includes opponent's creatures, so the stacks effects in the deck go even farther than usual. Obviously, I'm running Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos, and this time Butcher of Malakir too, since the Butcher very well matches the flavor of the deck. These are excellent ways to get rid of opponent's creatures, whether they have indestructible, hexproof, shroud, etc. With any of these enchantments, when any creature we control dies, Elenda essentially gets 4 +1/+1 counters. If we control both, she gets 7 +1/+1 counters. Blade of the Bloodchief is another way to give Elenda even more +1/+1 counters when a creature dies. Since she's a vampire, she got 3 +1/+1 counters whenever any other creature dies while she's equipped with it, so this is definitely a great way to make Elenda get bigger faster. Cordial Vampire and Indulgent Aristocrat put a +1/+1 counter on all of our vampires. The former does it automatically whenever it or another creature dies, while the latter needs to be activated. What's great about these creatures is that we can kill 1 or 2 weenies in order to not just massively pump Elenda, but also pump our vampire army too. However, Indulgent Aristocrat takes it a step further by being a sacrifice outlet as well. If we sacrifice Elenda to it, we can stack the triggers in such a way where Elenda resolves first. That way, all those vampire tokens enter the battlefield and then the Aristocrat trigger resolves, putting a +1/+1 counter on all of them. Tisa Karloff can also double how Elenda gets counters since she doubles death triggers. Not only does this pair with Elenda, but with all of our other Aristocrat effects too, like the previously mentioned stacked pieces as well as the other effects we'll be seeing later on. As a bonus, she also gives our tokens Vigilance and Lifelink. The Ozolith can be used to play with all those +1/+1 counters going around. If our army has a bunch of +1/+1 counters distributed amongst them, whenever any of them die, those counters go to the Ozolith. Same with Elenda when she dies. Those counters can then be passed along to an attacker afterwards. We can also pass them back to Elenda later on for even more recurring value. We can also pump Elenda the old-fashioned way with Lords and Global Boons. Vanquisher's Banner, Captivating Vampire, and Vault of the Archangel. When we choose Vampire for the creature type, not only will the banner pump our vampires +1/+1, but we cantrip whenever we cast a vampire creature. There are plenty of similar effects in the deck, but we'll see them soon enough. Captivating Vampire also gives our vampires +1/+1, but we can also use it to steal a creature and make them a vampire in the process. This is definitely a great removal effect as well, but we'll see those later on. Vault of the Archangel makes our weenie tokens dangerous by deterring attacks as well as blocks. We also gain life in the process. Bloodline Keeper also helps in making more tokens to sacrifice to make Elenda bigger, but it can also pump Elenda when it transforms into Lord of Lineage. It can still tap to create flying vampire tokens, but it gives all other vampires we control +2/+2, which is crazy here. Anointed Procession is another epic way to double not only Elenda's effect, but those of other token creators as well. Thanks to this enchantment, we don't have to make Elenda so large to get so many tokens from her death trigger. Maverin Fane, Dusk Apostle, and Westville Abbey are the remaining token creators. Westville Abbey has the added bonus of being a sacrifice outlet. Granted, you need to sacrifice 5 creatures at a time, but once you do, it transforms into Ormendal Profane Prince, a 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So definitely a huge beater if we get it online. We can also sacrifice Elenda for free with High Market. Being on a land makes it harder to get rid of, and we can activate it at instant speed without investing mana, other than not using it for mana in the first place in order to have it tapped. We gain a life as a bonus since the main point of running it is for sacrifices. Besides making Elenda huge and getting a lot of tokens from her, we can also sacrifice creatures for punishment as well as for value. Cruel Celebrant, Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, Falconwrath Noble, Vindictive Vampire, Sir Conrad the Grim, and Bastion of Remembrance all drain opponents for life whenever a creature dies. Although some of these effects are better than others since some are restricted to only creatures we control, while some are restricted to hitting only one opponent at a time, the fact remains that these permanents weaponize death triggers. Since it's life loss and not damage, it also bypasses any effects that prevent damage. We can also use our army to drain life with Sanctum Seeker. Draining 1 life for each attacking vampire might not seem like much, but the amount of vampires we can attack with, this will definitely add up, especially if we sacrifice them afterwards to continue draining with any of the aforementioned drain effects, so opponents will lose life on attack, on the damage step, and then sometime afterwards. We can further weaponize Death Trigger to opponents' creatures beyond the previously mentioned stacks pieces thanks to Aili, Eternal Pilgrim, Teysa Orzhov Scion, and Attrition. Aili can be used not only as a sacrifice outlet for Elenda, but with enough life you can essentially exile any non-land permanent without tapping her. This can be very harrowing to opponents once you have enough life and fodder to take away their key cards. Although most creatures in the deck are black, the tokens created are white, whether they're spirits or vampires, so Teysa can also be used to exile cards, albeit limited to creatures. This isn't a problem because with enough white creatures on the board we can essentially lock commanders out of the game. Vona, Butcher of Magan, can also serve as spot removal at the cost of 7 life though. Either way, she has Vigilance and Lifelink, so you can get some of that life back. It's still a good trade-off with all the life you're gaining in the deck. In any case, the deck is running Anguished Unmaking, Generous Gift, and Despark as instant speed responses just in case. The deck might make short vertical creatures, but we still have to worry about other permanent types, which is why these cards along with Vona can really make a difference. Same goes for Return to Dust. Not only can this get rid of 2 potential Pillow Fort effects, but it can also be used to further set opponents back by destroying 2 mana rocks once we realize they aren't piloting our weakness. Even then, if all else fails, Damnation and Wrath of God gets the job done. With Elenda being large enough, you can wipe the entire board and be the only one left with an army. If that weren't enough, you can also cast these and then in response make your army indestructible just to guarantee they go through. Flawless Maneuver and Rootborn Defenses are included to not only protect our board state from an opponent's Wrath effect, but to also use offensively as previously explained. As a bonus, Rootborn Defense populates first. Flawless Maneuver is definitely the best one since it can be cast for free. Teferi's Protection is the final response in the deck. Again, used in response to a board wipe or mass bounce effect, this protects our tokens, which is key since the deck does create a lot of them and the last thing we want is to lose them all and have our work be for naught. As to using our sacrifices for further value and our own benefit, like a true Aristocrats deck, we have many ways of drawing cards off of our creatures falling for the greater good. Grim Haruspex, Species Specialist, Dark Prophecy, and Liliana Dreadhorde General draws cards when creatures die. Unfortunately, the Haruspex only triggers with non-token creatures, but we can sacrifice non-token creatures too for value, so it does have its merits. Species Specialist is better used if we choose Vampire for the creature type since the deck has and creates way more vampires than anything else. Liliana's other abilities are incredibly useful as well, especially her -4 ability, which is a sacrifice outlet and disruptive effect all in one. Smothering Abomination can also draw its cards this way, but only if the creature is sacrificed, which is something that happens most of the time in the deck anyways. It even triggers that itself at the beginning of our upkeep, which also makes it a good sacrifice outlet for Elenda in a pinch. Urbos Bleak-Hearted can also draw its cards when creatures are killed, but we have to pay 2 life, which isn't a big deal in the deck. It's practically free. It also has a built-in sacrifice outlet to potentially take out creatures, so it does do a lot of things all at once, which is great for any card. Priest of Forgotten Gods and Krav the Unredeemed can draw cards at the expense of sacrificing creatures. The Priest can also give us 2 black mana for our troubles, as well as making our opponents sacrifice creatures. Krav is definitely an amazing one since it doesn't need to tap. The death to draw ratio is also great, all for just 1 black mana to activate. It also gets bigger as well, making it quite the beater. Champion of Dusk takes advantage of the vampire tribal aspect to draw into a ton of cards when it enters the battlefield. We can also sacrifice it and then get it back onto the battlefield later on to further recur its value, but we'll see more of that soon. We might lose life for its ability, but the deck gains so much life that we can afford it. Skull Clamp is amazing here if our winning tokens are still 1/1s. We're able to draw a card each time for just 1 generic mana. Even if they're pumped because of boons or lord effects, it doesn't matter. We can still draw cards off of a creature getting sacrificed for free, especially with Viscera Seer. Along with Path of Ancestry, they don't really draw us cards, but they do improve our card draw by scrying us 1. That being said, the best thing about Viscera Seer is it being a 1-drop vampire with a fee sacrifice outlet. Reliquary Tower is included because of all the cards this deck draws. It's a land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped and can be tapped for mana. It might be colorless, but that's not a big deal in a 2-color deck. That being said, we might draw into tons of cards, but sometimes we might need one in particular. Diabolic Intent and CDC Undead Vizier help with just that. Not only are these tutors, but in order to tutor, we have to sacrifice a creature. And what better creature to sacrifice than Elenda herself? That way we're taking the most advantage out of her ability as possible. A quick note. Even though Elenda works much better now due to the June 7th, 2020 rules update, we can't just cast her indefinitely from the command zone. There will come a point where the tax is too high. She should be sent to the command zone from the graveyard as a state-based action only if you would easily be able to recast her again afterwards. This is the only benefit from this rule. This means that we don't have to run as many reanimation spells in the deck, but we should still have some effects to prevent her cost getting too high. Athreos, Shroud Veil, and Gift of Immortality can get Elenda back onto the battlefield right after she dies. Be aware of the timing though. Athreos gives her a coin counter at the end of your turn, which is what makes her return to the battlefield after she dies. She has to also be enchanted by Gift of Immortality, which returns to the battlefield at the end of the turn. Keep this in mind and you might be able to sacrifice Elenda for value indefinitely. Luminous Broodmoth, Kaya's Ghost Form, and Cauldron of the Souls can also get Elenda back onto the battlefield right after she dies. Mothra gives her a flying counter, which is great because she gets evasion, which makes her an even better beater, even though that means she won't come back thanks to it afterwards. Kaya's Ghost Form is pretty much a one-time use only thing, but at least it's cheap to cast and have attached to Elenda as a way to not worry about her for one trigger at least. The Cauldron gives her Persist, but she enters the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter, killing her as a state-based action unless there's a boon pumping her toughness. However, the Cauldron is still a great card in the deck since you can sacrifice non-token creatures and get them all back thanks to giving them Persist. Together Forever can help in returning her to our hand for just 1 generic mana since her ability has her receiving +1/+1 counters. Either way, it has support too, so you can give her another +1/+1 counter when it enters the battlefield. Whisper Blood of the Turgis can straight up reanimate Elenda if she gets to a point where it's better to just reanimate her than recast her from the command zone. He also serves as a sacrifice outlet to get any creatures from the graveyard really. Elenda isn't the only important creature in the deck after all. We can also recover enchantments from the graveyard thanks to Hall of Heliod's Generosity. The deck doesn't have a lot of enchantments in it, but it is a land that can tap for mana and doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. It's also a great way to recover key auras like Kara's Ghost Form and Gift of Immortality, as well as recovering things like Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos if destroyed. It's definitely a good way to keep having access to those back-breaking enchantments that make our opponents miserable. One final way we can take advantage of these strategies is to generate a ton of mana. Ashland's Altar and Phyrexian Altar in particular are the best ones in the deck since they're free. If Elenda is large enough, we can sacrifice her to one of these in a pinch and then the tokens she created in order to generate the mana needed to recast her from the command zone in case of emergencies. Again, we don't want to send her to the command zone haphazardly since her attacks will rack up. Phyrexian Tower can do the same on a land, but it requires tapping to activate and can only give double black. That being said, lands are harder to get rid of, so it's a relatively safe, free, instant speed sacrifice outlet. Pitiless Plunderer takes advantage of our creatures dying to create treasures. The best part of treasures is that they remain on the battlefield so we can use them whenever we need to. This helps keeps us way ahead in resources than opponents to guarantee we win any wars of attrition. Besides these, the deck is running its run-of-the-mill mana sources like Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Talisman of Hierarchy, Orzhov Signet, Arcane Signet, and Felwar Stone. Even though we can generate mana synergistically, if we don't have any creatures to sacrifice, then most of those effects are moot. Besides, dropping these early game really makes a difference. The final rock is Heraldic Banner, which can not only tap for any color of mana, but it can also pump our vampires +1/+0. Sure, we have to name Vampire when we do, but what are we going to name? Burschwag? The rest of the deck is just the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Ancient Tomb, Command Tower, Isolated Chapel, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, Godless Shrine, Scrub Land, Caves of Koilos, Tainted Field, Fetid Heath, and Silent Clearing, as well as 4 of each snow basic land in case opponents are running anything that benefits us for it. With the amount of life the deck gains, we have the luxury of running a more than average amount of painful lands. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Elenda the Dusk Rose. Even though the rules change made her more viable than before, it doesn't mean she's more broken now. You still have to take care not to make her commander tax go too high, so you should still run some reanimation effects even if not as many as before. That being said, she's definitely a powerhouse of a commander for an Aristocrats strategy, and what better Aristocrats deck than a Vampire Tribal one. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.